And welcome back. On today's edition of the Hank Irwin Show, we are in Nashville for the annual National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And I've got William Federer with me, and I know that many of you have read a lot of his works, everything from God and Country to his latest books, and I want to let you know this is what he looks like. When you read his work, you'll be even more impressed. I want to congratulate you from the state of Alabama, because people in Alabama read your works, and we're so proud of you.
Well, I thank God for you, Senator, and what you've done in Alabama and all the great legislatures and officials there, and you're a great light to the rest of the country.
Tell me how you got started writing these great patriotic works that you've got going.
Well, the first one you mentioned, America's God and Country, it was back in around 94, and I had seen how their lawsuits to take God out of the pledge, and yet we got God on our coins, and so I researched every one of the 50 state constitutions and every amendment to every state constitution, all the references to God, and then every colonial charter, and found out something interesting, by the way. Every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. So Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Connecticut, New Hampshire were Congregationalist, Rhode Island was Baptist, Maryland Catholic, New York was Dutch Reformed, Delaware and New Jersey were Swedish Lutheran, Pennsylvania Quaker. They did not get along, and they would chase each other out of each other's colonies. But then they had to work together to fight the King of England during the Revolution. After the Revolution, they said, well, we may not agree, but you were willing to fight and die for my freedom. I need to let you practice your faith. So in 1776, 98% of the country was Protestant, a little less than 2% Catholic, and 0.1% Jewish. And then there was an Irish potato famine, and millions of Irish Catholics came to America. The Catholic percent went from 2 to 20%. There was an anti-Catholic backlash, but then it settled down, and then states changed their constitutions, like North Carolina in 1835, changed their state constitution from requiring you to be a Protestant Christian to hold office to just being a plain Christian. Right, that was in effect up until 1868 in North Carolina, and then I go through how, as time went on, you drop a pebble in the pond, the ripples go out. So first it was tolerance for the denomination that started the colony, then out to Protestants, then out to Catholics. Then there was a persecution of Jews in the middle 1800s in Bavaria, and about 250,000 Ashkenazic Jews come to America. In 1851, Maryland changes its constitution to say every office holder must be a Christian, and if the party shall profess to be a Jew, the declaration shall be of a belief in a future state of rewards and punishments. And then after the Civil War, many states rewrote their constitution and said all you had to do was believe in God. Matter of fact, many of them still have that, but in 1960 there was a Supreme Court case where the ACLU said they cannot enforce it. But so we've seen how the very people that started the country are now not being tolerated by the ones that they let in. So it's sort of like you have a lifeboat, and into the boat comes the Puritans, and then the Protestants, and then the Catholics and the Jews and the liberal Christians, and finally comes in the atheists, and the atheists say the boat's too crowded, and they push out the Christians that started the whole thing.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? And it seems like it never fails, the same cycle. It always happens through history. Now it's happening here in America. You've got a new workout that I want you to talk about three secular reasons why this ought to be a nation under God.
Yeah, 3 secular reasons why America should be on God. The first is you like being equal. I was speaking in the U.S. Capitol, and I had a congressional staff briefing. Afterwards, a Washington Post reporter calls me and said, are you trying to push Christianity on America, like I'm having a clandestine backroom meeting? And I asked the reporter, I said, where did equality come from? And she said, well, I don't know. I said, well, did it come from Islam? And she chuckled because the Washington Post had recently ran an article, and it talked about how in their textbooks they said Jews are apes and pigs and so forth. Well, matter of fact, in Islam, it takes 2 women to testify against 1 man. A woman gets half the inheritance that a man gets. A man can have 4 wives, a woman cannot have 4 husbands. There's not equality there. Equality did not originate in India, where they have the caste system, and if you just happen to be born in the lowest caste, you are an untouchable, and you have to take care of the garbage and clean the toilets, and no matter how hard you work, you can never graduate and become a Brahmin, right? And so equality did not originate there. Equality did not originate in the atheistic countries like the former Soviet Union, where your worth is dependent on your utility. If you're useful to the state, you're worth more. If not, you're voted off the island, the survivor program stuff. Well, in America, you're equal, not because you're a Muslim male, not because you're a Brahmin in the highest caste, and not because you're useful to the state. You're equal. Why? Well, Democrat President Harry S. Truman, 1949 inaugural address, said, we believe all men are created equal because we're created in the image of God. And so this is a biblical concept, goes back to the book of Genesis. In Islam, Muhammad said Allah has no image, right? He's transcendent and unknowable. In Hinduism, there's 300 million different gods, so pick which one you're in the image of. And then in atheism, there is no God. And so the very idea is you're equal before the law because you're equal before a creator. Anyway, that's just one of the concepts in there. But I've recently did a book on Islam. And now we're not just tolerating atheists, we're tolerating Islam that has a 1,400-year track record of destroying Christian countries. And people forget Egypt had been Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark that wrote the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in 642 AD, it was Amir ibn Alas was the Muslim general, came in and killed them and conquered them and tore down the pyramids. And the story is he destroyed the library that was at Alexandria that had stuff that went back to Abraham's time, you know. And then there were 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa, all wiped out by the Muslims. Then they invaded Spain in the year 732, actually 711. And in 10 years they conquered all of Spain. And they were finally stopped just outside of Paris in 732 AD by Charles Martel. So Muhammad dies in 632 AD. By 732 AD, they're outside of Paris. And so there's a military history that Islam has, and it goes back to Muhammad, how he was a religious leader for 12 years and only made 70 converts. He gets chased out of Mecca and goes to Medina, where he becomes a political leader, sort of like a community organizer, right? And then he begins robbing caravans, and he becomes a military leader. And Muhammad fights in 66 battles in the next 8 years before he dies, leads 27 of them, and he even used the catapult when he attacked a city called Al-Taif. And when he was told the catapult was killing women and children, Muhammad's response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So suicide bombers today say it's okay to kill innocent people to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And since he's the perfect Muslim, Muslims that want to be better Muslims or more devout Muslims that are wanting to be like Muhammad religiously, politically, and militarily. So the more fundamentally they follow his example, the more violent they get.
That's why people need to read your work to better understand what we're up against. How do they get a hold of your works?
Well, AmericanMinute.com is my website, and this is the book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. And can I say a word about another book?
Oh, yeah.
It's called Change to Chains, and it is a survey of 6,000 years of world history. And so it took about a year to read. I literally researched every single empire. The first human records appear about 4,000 BC, and 4,000 BC, 2080 is 6,000 years. Right? It's sort of coincidentally, that's about as long as the Bible says man's been around. But 6,000 years is really not that long. It's just 60 people living 100 years each back to back. Right? Everybody knows somebody that's lived 100 years. Just take 60 of those, and you're all the way back to the beginning of recorded human civilization. And so the first period is more agricultural, then they gravitate into cities, and then there's the first king that they have is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and the oldest novel in history is the Epic of Gilgamesh. By the way, he's on a search to find Uptanapshrin, a survivor of a global flood, who built a big box, covered it with tar and pitch, and put animals in it. This was 1,000 years before Moses he wrote this. Anyway, then you got the King Sargon of Akkadian. Some of the Jewish commentaries think that that was Nimrod. But he has conquered from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. And then there's the Assyrians, and then there's the Egyptians. There's 33 Egyptian dynasties from the beginning Dozier all the way up to Cleopatra the Fourth. And then you have the Indian Maharajas and the Chinese emperors. There's 18 major Chinese dynasties from Yu the Great all the way through the Ming Dynasty. And then Alexander the Great, and Julius Caesar, and the Muslim sultans, the Byzantine emperors, and the Aztec Montezumas, and the King Kamehamehas. No matter where you go in the world, in these 60 centuries, the typical form of government is what? It's monarchy, dictatorship. Power inevitably gravitates into the hands of one person. And they go by different names, Caesars, pharaohs, kaisers, sultans, and czars. But it's sort of like you drop a bunch of kids on a playground. One of them winds up being the bully hogging the ball. You drop a bunch of people in the woods. One of them winds up being the Indian chief. And you drop a bunch of people in the inner city. One of them winds up being the gang leader. And so this Lord of the Rings, everybody wants that ring of power. And that's the norm. Now, every now and then, people try to stretch the rubber band and have a government without a king. Israel, under the judges for 200 years, didn't have a king. They were all equal before this law. And then finally they went to Samuel, said, we don't like this. We want to be like all the other countries. We want a king. Samuel said, you're not going to like it. but he's going to take your best land and give it to his favorites, wealth redistribution. He's going to determine the fate of your kids. Anyway, that was Israel. Then Athens. From about 600 BC to 332, they had a democracy. Everybody voted and so forth until Philip of Macedon took it over, father of Alexander the Great. And then Rome had a republic from about 509 BC to 27 BC until Julius Caesar made himself dictator for life. And so you go through history, and every now and then when they try to have a government without a king, it always snaps back. And now we come to America. We took the power of King George III, we separated it into 3 branches, separated federal to state level, then we tied up this new federal Frankenstein with 10 handcuffs we call the first 10 amendments. But after every crisis, Civil War, World War I, FDR during World War II, and Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, Nixon's war on drugs, and Bush's war on terror, after every crisis we see a gradual reconcentration of power back into the hands of ultimately one person. And so he who dictates is effectively a dictator. And if you're friends with this dictator, you're more equal. You're not friends with the dictator, you're less equal. You're an enemy of the dictator, you're dead. It's called treason. And so if you're a friend of the president, you get an Obamacare waiver, and if your name's George Soros, you get $2 billion to drill off Brazil with your Petrobras oil company. If you're not a friend of the president, you get your Gibson guitar factory raided and your car dealership shut down. And if you're an enemy of the president, your character assassinated in the media. And so we're moving back in the direction of the patronage system rather than the way our founders did it, where everybody's equal before a creator. But anyway, that's in the book Change to Chains.
Hey, listen, these are works that you folks need to read. I want you to go on the internet and learn about William Federer. And again, how can they get to your website? You've got a Facebook and everything.
Right, AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily email where I take all this history and put it into little bite-sized daily doses. Last book I did came out last year. It's called Prayers and Presidents, and the current president decided not to celebrate the National Day of Prayer. So I researched every past president, their days of prayer, Thanksgiving, and get this, fasting. So when the British burnt the White House, James Madison declared a day of fasting. Well, twice during the Civil War, Lincoln had days of fasting. When we entered World War I, Woodrow Wilson had a day of fasting and prayer to Almighty God. And anyway, so when you see that and you see, what's going on today, it is a way that we can call ourselves back, because we may be facing crises in the future, and I think we need to turn to God.
I think that's why you need to read William Federer's books. Get a book, start reading, let your kids read it. You'll learn things you never knew, things that are a part of American history. And I want to thank you, Bill, for all that you've done. You make us mighty proud.
Thank you, Senator.
Very good. We're going to continue our visit here at the NRB in Nashville. Stay with us.